Hey, everybody, welcome to another Monday Morning Murph. Matthew Coller here with Brian Murphy. And, Murph, I was going through the YouTube comments looking at how people were reacting to our post-game show from Soldier Field yesterday. And the one thing I was a little concerned about was people thinking that we were a little too hard on the Minnesota Vikings, despite the fact that they won the game. And you know what I couldn't find, Murph? A single person who was saying, "Hey, what are you guys talking about? They won the game. Who cares how they won it? Winning ugly is fine." Most people were saying that they still want to trade Daniil Hunter, or what the heck is wrong with the offense. I saw criticisms for Kevin O'Connell, Alexander Madison, TJ Hawkinson, and so forth. So, where do you stand on this? They are now 2-4. They get a win, but it certainly wasn't convincing for their future. Season's still alive, though.
Yeah, I mean, they did what they had to do. They bought another week of relevance. Going into a Monday night showdown at home against arguably one of the best NFC teams out there. Granted, they had a hiccup yesterday in Cleveland and lost a couple of key starters, which we'll probably get into as well. It's still the San Francisco 49ers. They're still 5-1. You're still looking at a long uphill climb. I think, the comments matter because context and optics do matter. If the Vikings were 3-1 yesterday or 4-1 yesterday, and they won ugly, it would have been, well, just get out of Chicago, escape that house of mirrors, because it's always a weird week every time they visit Soldier Field anyway. Be thankful. I mean, they had a run there for 10 years where they couldn't buy a win. They have been winning there lately. Take the ugly win, get home, pocket it, move on to your next big challenge. Well, the problem is the Vikings are barely 2-4. And when you look at their 6 games in totality, who have they beaten? They've beaten a rookie quarterback in Carolina who was clearly in over his head. And yesterday they end up beating a Division II backup quarterback. So I'm not feeling very good. If anything, the defense rose to the occasion in both of those road wins by making key plays at key moments, pressuring their quarterbacks into making bad decisions. Brian Flores, probably the star of both of those victories. But you're not going to be able to do that against San Francisco, even though Brock Purdy may be regressing to the mean here a little bit. This is still a really, really good, seasoned, well-coached football team. You can get away with not being able to move the ball, not being able to convert on third down, turning it over again at inopportune times. And oh, by the way, now you don't have Justin Jefferson. And we got our first glimpse of what that offense is going to look like without Justin Jefferson yesterday. They could barely get 200 yards, barely sustain any drives. So, yeah, I'm of the thinking a win is a win is a win mathematically in the win column. And what it does is it holds off for at least one more week the gloom and doom. It holds off the sell-off attitude that's going to invade this town if they lose another game here quickly before the trade deadline, and it's gonna stir up all that uncertainty about the future with Kirk Cousins, the future without Kirk Cousins. What are you aligning yourselves up for in the draft? What's Justin Jefferson going to want? When's he going to come back? In what condition will he come back? Will he have an influence in when he comes back, knowing it's a lost season, knowing that he's playing with a lame duck quarterback? All of those things you can put off for at least another week, and it bought some time. But I was not inspired by anything yesterday. The only thing I was inspired by is they bought us another week.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've seen before matters to how we view it. And I also think that, there's a meme. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a guy sitting at a table and it always says something different, but it says like change my mind. And then people fill in the different things. Here's my opinion, change my mind. And I went into Soldier Field thinking, change my mind, blow this team out. And yes, I know people have pointed out that they never blow anybody out. Well, that's not a compliment. That's a really bad thing for your team. Kind of says a lot about a lot of things. Actually, the fact that you can never, ever blow anybody out since 2019 kind of speaks to the mediocrity of this team. I looked this up, and I think it was since 2020, they have a negative point differential, and a team like Buffalo is plus 500 and something. Like the gap doesn't feel that big on a week to week basis, but over the last number of years, they've been very much the same team over and over with just variance, good luck and bad luck. But overall, their point differential is somewhere hovering around zero, and the great teams are outscoring people and running away from bad teams most of the time. Although Buffalo did not do that against the New York Giants, but most of the time that's what's happening over a season is they blow teams out like this. And if they wanted to change my mind, they did not, and they did not come anywhere close to doing that. 220 yards against the New York Jets might be like, okay, fine, but 220 yards against the defense that was one of the absolute most dreadful in the entire NFL, a team that can't pressure the quarterback at all. And yeah, they got a couple of their cornerbacks back, but come on, like Kirk Cousins often had a ton of time to throw, and they still were not getting open or not timing out passes correctly or whatever it might have been. And this passing offense, it's clear whether Jefferson's here or not, it's not going to be an elite passing offense. And it's not even going to be a remotely good running offense. And with the defense, we've seen it pummel, bad quarterbacks, and we've seen it struggle against good quarterbacks, which is about what you would expect from a defense that I think is around average or a little worse than average. So there was nothing to change my mind. And Murph, I know you said it buys them a week, but I think if Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is not on the phone this week, then he's being foolish, because there are teams that are growing desperate about their own chances, that are coming off losses, that think they need one more pass rusher or think they need one more receiver. And if somebody calls this week and says, hey, I'd really like that Danielle Hunter, that was a great showing against Chicago, how is Kwesi supposed to say no at this point based on what he just saw?
No, it'd be malfeasance if he isn't having those conversations. And so much of the buzz and so much of the chatter is about what will they do with Cousins, right? The lame duck, 35. There may be a team out there that's desperate enough to trade away some high assets to get an experienced, productive quarterback to try to catch lightning in a bottle. But this isn't baseball. You don't just grab a right arm off the street, put him in the rotation and say, go strike out 12 guys and we'll make plays behind you. Everybody knows in the NFL, offenses are installed in April. Systems are in place for months. Coaching philosophies are baked in. You can't just kind of kite in the middle of the season and try to learn all that terminology, all those schemes right away in a pressure cooker situation. And that's what Cousins is going to find himself in. And oh, by the way, we've talked about this as well. He's got a no trade clause. Why would he? And you wrote about this last week. Why would Cousins want to uproot his young family from a comfortable life in Minnesota to go to a market with searing high expectations and expect him to deliver a Lombardi trophy while learning everything on the fly, while living in a condo all by himself? I mean, so much for Tuesdays at the mall with the kids. I don't see Cousins signing up for that. When he can wait a couple of months and play the entire free agent field, pick and choose where he'd like to go, where he'd like to settle his family, what coaching staff he'd feel comfortable with, and make a kind of a measured decision. That being said, where a team desperate for a piece, maybe it's a running back, maybe it's a defensive end, a pass rusher, maybe it's a veteran safety like a Harrison Smith, those guys might be more attractive for plug and play opportunities at the trade deadline. Those are the calls that Kwesi may be accepting and should be exploring more, because I don't see a lot of fruit necessarily at the end of the Cousins tree. But what you've seen from the club on both sides of the ball this season and most of last season gives you a pretty good indication of what this team is. You're right. It only buys them another week of chatter that there's hope against San Francisco. But, 2-5 is going to be just as much mail it in as 1-5 would have been this week as well. So I don't sense a growing feeling within the locker room or within the market that this is the stretch of games. This kind of win in Chicago, that kind of win against San Francisco is really going to change the business calculus of where they're at with some of these veteran players, what their true value may be. It's going to be valuable on October 31st, probably more so than it would be on March 1st. So Kwesi's got to make a huge decision. And then if you do package something dramatic together, what do you sell in the fan base on November 1st? That'll be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think the hard thing for Kwesi adofo-mensah is his relationship with Kevin O'Connell is very important. And if I'm Kevin O'Connell, I would be saying probably to Kwesi, look, we won. We've got a chance to beat San Francisco. They're a little banged up here. And why don't you give me a shot? Like, why don't you let me try to fix some of these things that are going wrong? And I think the fear is that they beat San Francisco because in the long run over what we've seen that this team is going to be who they're going to be. If they beat San Francisco, just knowing the Minnesota Vikings, they would lose in Green Bay the next week, and we would ping pong back and forth around 500, hoping and praying that they can make the playoffs at 9-8 or something like that, and they would have a loss to Denver or something along the way just when we were convinced, oh, they're on the way and they're like this great turnaround story, and then you fall apart in some game that you're not supposed to lose. And then, by the way, at the end of the season, so Joe Burrow looks like he's sort of fixed, and Cincinnati's on their way. And you play Detroit 2 of the last 3 games. Detroit looks like very possibly the strongest team in the entire NFC. I mean, Philadelphia kind of had a meltdown against the Jets. A lot of people do against Robert Sala's defense, but they're a little bit flawed. San Francisco is, head and shoulders probably above everyone else, but right there is the Detroit Lions. They're 5-1. They have been great. Jared Goff is absolutely balling, and for the whatever numberth time, Jared Goff not getting credit for being like really, really good and winning games and putting up big offenses. I don't understand that. But the point is that it's just so hard to see, even if you beat San Francisco, you almost want to do this before you have any chance of pulling a random upset at home that convinces everybody. But if I'm Kevin O'Connell, I'm like, give me a chance to win this game before you trade away all of my players. And normally, Murph, I would not care that much about the trade deadline because look, whatever. I mean, what are you getting for people? But when it's Danielle Hunter, I it's hard to see the Kirk thing. But when it's Danielle Hunter and you could get something significant for one of the best pass rushers in the league, and it doesn't look like you're signing him long term, then you have to make this decision pretty soon because every single week that he plays, there's an injury risk. And there's also the price goes down because whoever buys him gets fewer weeks of Danielle Hunter for this year. So I don't think because of the dynamic they can make a move right now, but I think it's logical to talk about doing it after what we saw yesterday.
Well, certainly logical, and if you strip out all of the emotion and sort of the marketing aspect of it, it probably makes the most sense to entertain offers now. And you're right, you almost don't go down the fool's rabbit hole of beating San Francisco and creating false hope for what we're pretty well convinced is at best a 9-8 slog that gets you a wild card and an early exit. Because as you mentioned, it seems like Detroit has tightened its grip on the NFC North, and the Vikings don't play Detroit until the final two of the last 3 weeks, and at that point, it's probably already going to be in the bag. I mean, you may be battling for a wild card spot, but you're not going to be battling for the division title. All of that in a vacuum is true. I'd love to know what your sales pitch is to the locker room and the market in general. If you trade away Danielle Hunter this week, you may get maximum value for him, and in the long run, it may be the most prudent move. But you got to come up with something better than competitive rebuild, and you got to come up with something that's going to convince that locker room to be just more than professional pride. And now you're going to have to convince Justin Jefferson that, you're on the IR here for 4 weeks. We expect you back on November 10th or 12th or whatever the date is, and lay it all out there for the right to finish, 6-11. So, and by the way, we wanted to sign you before the season, but now we really believe in you more. So come to the table with an open mind and hang on. We've got a draft plan. We're not really necessarily ready to share with you or the public, but just trust in us. I'm just speaking off the cuff here. These are the things that the ripple effects of those prudent decisions. They're more than just roster intrigue, and they're more than just building for 2024 and 2025. There's a psychological aspect of this that you've got to lay out there, and you got to be transparent and honest with your paying audience, and you got to be transparent and honest with your superstar who's about to make a huge decision about his future and where he wants to spend the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, with Jefferson, guaranteed money heals a lot of wounds, I think, and there will be a lot of guaranteed money that gets put on the table for him this offseason. That one, I refuse to push any panic meters at all until we have to, or buttons, or look at meters, or whatever, until we absolutely have to, until he is publicly demanding a trade or something like that. I'm not that concerned about that element of it, or even honestly like the locker room or what the public thinks, because I think the public thinks they're not good and they should probably be doing stuff like this. But it's really, we saw what happened with Zimmer and Spielman and the coach and GM relationship. I think that's a very important relationship to have these guys on the same page. And even though we all rolled our eyes at culture of collaboration, what you don't want is culture of headbutting, a culture of complete disagreement where the coach thinks that he's the general manager and he should be calling shots, and the old, Bill Parcells get my groceries, sort of thing. If Kevin O'Connell doesn't believe in Kwesi's roster building, then we've got ourselves some sort of trouble. From yesterday's game, Murph, the big discussion in the press box, and you know how it could be after a game, 3 hours after a game, the stadium's empty. There's four of us in Soldier Field, hoping not to get locked in the building or whatever, and the conversations that go on then. But the big one is, I'll only reveal this percentage of those conversations, which is, what is the deal with this offense? I mean, okay, no Jefferson, but you're playing the worst defense, like just an absolutely horrendous defense. Is there something that you look at that you see, like, because people bring up, is it coaching? Is it Kirk is losing his fastball? Is it TJ Hawkinson is overrated and everybody around Jefferson ends up overrated because Jefferson takes all the attention? Is it Madison's fault? Is it the guard's fault? Like, 220 yards is a red flag against the Chicago Bears. It's not just, oh, well, they didn't have their day. It was miserable. They had 2 first downs in the entire second half. That's what you do against the 85 Bears, not the 2023 Bears.
Well, I think if you look at it, it's one of those where it's probably everything. And I am not an X's and O's guy or a schematic kind of guy that can point to anything, even if I rewatch the game several times. But what I look at and what I listened to Kevin O'Connell after the game talking about blown assignments from our veteran guys, our experienced players, there's kind of a lackadaisical attitude there that spreads throughout the line. I mean, you can pick out any game and say the interior line blocking was awful. You can pick out any game and say that turnover at that moment short circuited the entire offense and jolted it. You could look at their inability yesterday to sustain drives and pick up third downs against one of the worst third down defenses on the planet. That was what was frustrating. The worst timed penalties, some of which were suspect. I mean, let's be honest, that grounding call against Cousins, I'm not one to complain about officiating, but that was horrific. The pass that he overthrew C.J. Ham on that final, late in the fourth quarter, I mean, that could have made things a lot easier if they'd have been able to sustain that drive and snuff the clock. Instead, they're handing it back to Chicago. And if it's not, our wayward hero from Shepherd University running the show, and it was Fields that got the ball with 2 minutes left, we may be talking about the death knell today as opposed to we got another week of relevance. But I've looked at it from a totality. It's no running game, poor protection, awful turnovers at the worst moments, bad penalties, and an inability to pick up first downs. That's been problematic throughout the season, which says it's just systemic. It says it's really not maybe that correctable. And it says this is kind of who they are. I mean, if you put up 220 yards against the Chicago Bears, I don't know what people think they're going to do Monday night at home. And oh, by the way, they're 0-3 at home this season as well. I mean, they've the fans, and 0-4 going back to the playoff game against the Giants. I mean, the fans have showed up and done their part and delivered. The Vikings can't seem to do that at home. I mean, this is their last stand for the 2023 season is Monday night. But offensively, you mentioned it. I mean, you can go down a list of there's a multitude of sins that they've committed throughout the season that seem to rear their heads at the worst possible times in the first quarter, in the fourth quarter. When you're trying to build a lead and build momentum and build confidence, and when you're trying to put games away. And they haven't been able to do that. And they've lost because of that. There's been, you had communication issues against the Chargers at the goal line. Cousins' inability to decide to make a freelance decision on his own, or play it safe so he doesn't get in trouble with the coaches. There's all these little nuances that you keep hearing, and you're like, well, somebody's got to step up and lead. Somebody's got to step up and make a huge play at the right time. It'd be nice to get a 15-yard run on 3rd and 14. It'd be nice to get TJ Hawkinson to kind of earn the contract that he made no bones about during training camp he wanted. Jordan Addison's looked fine and good. He dropped a key pass yesterday, but as you mentioned, these are all issues that aren't new. And I'm gonna go deal with my dog right now because obviously he's been insulted by how they've been playing as well.
Yeah, you're right. Jordan Addison has shown a lot of dog in him.
Okay. Am I late for the rim shot? I'm late for the rim shot on that too.
Come on,
because that deserved everything, that dead air that we just had there.
Yeah, well, he's Addison. He's like a dog chasing a frisbee out there, just going up and making plays. No, honestly, but
at least that's entertaining.
One thing that sometimes they do that at halftime where they have dogs chasing frisbees.
Yes,
and it's
awesome.
A lot of fun. Yeah, absolutely. But and best to your dog as well. I really like your dog. But the offense, I think in the future, one thing that they need to make sure they have when they pick a different quarterback is somebody who is going to be a true leader of the offense. And I mean spits a little fire out of his face. Because, and this goes for the whole team really, but it's if they're going to have Brian Flores, he's going to lead that defense and he's going to be that guy. But I think Kevin O'Connell is overwhelmingly positive, and I respect that maybe this is like a Ted Lasso world for everybody, and that's what they want. They want super positive coaches and all that. Inside the locker room, though, you have to have some people who can say this is not good enough. And I have always kind of thought you need somebody who throws the Microsoft Surface on the ground when it's not going well, and maybe gets in some people's faces from time to time, and shows that sort of fire that they're going to take over the ship now. And it's not just all on the coach to be the leader all the time. And with O'Connell saying sort of steady and positive and that kind of thing, there has to be a little bit of balancing that out of this is not acceptable. And, it's got to get together, and it's got to get together right now, because they don't have that type of leader on offense aside from Justin Jefferson. And there's only so much a wide receiver can do. So that did strike me yesterday about just kind of the future of where they're going to go with Kevin O'Connell. Before we wrap, Murph, how do you think this thing plays out? Do you think that they lose to San Francisco? They have another game before the trade deadline, which is against Green Bay. They could be 3-5 at the deadline, which makes for an interesting conversation between the GM and head coach, where one of them I think will want to sell and the other one will want to try to get back in the playoff race from, the depths of 3-5. Where do you think it goes?
Well, I don't see them winning Monday night against San Francisco. Now, let's hear, how bad Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel are really hurt and what their statuses are going to be. That's going to be one ticked off team after leaving a win on the table in Cleveland because they missed a 40-yard field goal at the end. It's still got a hell of a defense, and it's still, one of the premier coaches in the league. They're still 5-1. I'll still take Brock Purdy right now in a big moment over Kirk Cousins, at least from what I've seen in the last year and a half. So there's that. You're right. They do. Let's say they go into Green Bay and take down their arch rivals. I think, again, what does it look like? What does the loss to San Francisco look like? Does it look like the loss to Dallas last year? Or does it look like the loss to the Chargers or the Buccaneers, or where they but for, as we said, one play here, but for one play there? How do they manage the expectations of what this game means? Because if they come out looking like they did in Chicago against San Francisco in what essentially is their season-defining game, that makes up my mind as well. And you're right, the lack of the surface thrower, the helmet pounder, The guy MFing his teammates up and down the sideline, that's normally your quarterback. Well, that's not going to be Cousins. We know that's not going to be Cousins. Gosh darn it, it's never going to be Cousins, and nor should we expect it to be. But you're right. Where is that other alpha male? I could see Harrison Smith on the defensive side, and if he ever stood up in a locker room and had something to say, I think he would command the floor. So yeah, what if they do lose to San Francisco? What does it look like? If they go to Green Bay and win, what does that look like? That might put a final cross of the T and dot of the I on your closing argument, at least for Kevin O'Connell. But at the end of the day, Kwesi was brought here to make the tough analytical decisions that his predecessor either refused to or was unable to. This is the cold-blooded assassin in the boardroom you need at that right moment, and you got to maximize your value at that point. Because I don't think 3-5 looks any better right now than 2-4. And you're running out of time at that point. And now you got to see what offers are on the table and do what's best for the franchise.
Yep. I think they'll give it till then, but if they lose to San Francisco, the way I always looked at it was they needed to upset Kansas City or San Francisco for Kevin O'Connell to really make that argument. And it's hard to see that being there, but as always, we'll see how it goes. And we will be reacting. It's going to be Tuesday morning, Murph, for next week after Monday Night Football. But always enjoy talking with you, Murph, on a Monday morning. And we will do it again soon, sir. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, safe travels. We'll see you soon.